it's an issue that you, together with 3 other human rights organizations, at least for now, have raised a serious objection to. Firstly, because this is still the submission phase of this particular one, let's talk about the problems which you've identified with this legislation.
Okay, so this is the regulation to the Births and Deaths Registration Act, and this is the part of the Act which tells you how to apply and what kind of forms will be issued to you. So this draft regulation proposes that from now on forward, we shouldn't issue birth certificates to foreign children anymore. We should just give them a notice which confirms the place of their birth. So the issue that we take with this is, firstly, that the child has the right to a birth certificate in terms of our constitution and in terms of international law, but also because the birth certificate is so important in order for you to access basic human rights such as education, medical services, and so forth.
What is the reasoning behind it? Has the department been able to provide it?
The department has not provided reasons. We can only speculate. We think that perhaps it's just part of exclusionary politics, in that foreign children, that we'd like to exclude foreign children. And we don't know the reason for that, because there's no legitimate purpose for giving foreign children a different document than a birth certificate.
What would this confirmation of birth, so what are the rights that the children of foreigners would be able to access with that particular document?
So that document will enable you only to go to your embassy to get a birth certificate from them. And that would seem easy, but the problem is that there are many children in this country who can't approach an embassy. For instance, refugee children, they can't approach an embassy because they are fleeing that country. And also, South Africa would take away their protection in terms of the Refugees Act if they had to approach the embassy. Another kind of child would be an orphaned or abandoned child who can't prove who their parent is, and they wouldn't be able to approach that parent's embassy. So that's the problem, that the person with the confirmation of birth doesn't have any rights to nationality or any other basic human rights that you have.
Do you think that at all this is an attempt by the Home Affairs Department to deal with the high level of immigrants that are in the country, given the fact that, at least from a border perspective, they haven't been able to document people, and certainly the asylum and refugee centers are dysfunctional at best, and there is an issue where government wants to be able to account for the number of foreigners, but they simply haven't been able to in the country.
Yes, I think that this might be an attempt, as you say, to regulate migration. And if it is, then it's a highly unconstitutional attempt, because we can never use children to regulate migration. We can't punish children for a migration problem that we perceive that we have. And so the Constitution doesn't allow us to limit the rights of children in order to achieve an aim that is unrelated.
So I imagine that the one thing you're not doing is missing tomorrow's deadline in terms of your submissions. But when exactly then would you become worried about, because it's still in the draft phase now, when would you become worried in terms of it actually being enacted?
Well, once it is published as a regulation, then, of course, it's part of the law. And at that point, we will definitely consider approaching a high court for an order of declaring this regulation to be unconstitutional.
It's interesting to me. Do you think that this change, it's indicative of a change in mindset in terms of our approach to how we treat people who are not South African?
Yes, I mean, we see this, we have a refugee law clinic, and we see this in our clinics every day. We see this with our clients. They're being treated terribly by both Home Affairs and sometimes by the public. And it's not everybody, definitely, but there is of course, there are public figures who say that the problems in this country is because of foreign nationals. And that, I think, is insightful and very irresponsible. And so there is at least in the narrative, there's more of a xenophobic tendency, which is very worrying to us.
Yeah, and it certainly would contribute to the number of undocumented minors that we have. And the Stats numbers have already told us that we have many undocumented children, some of them already belonging to both South African parents. So this will only deepen that problem. Thank you so much for joining us in studio. And of course, she is with human lawyers for human rights there.